I was watching a video on YouTube last night about the Cincinnati Bengals and how they completed the fastest rebuild, and I think we're about to see the Detroit Lions do exactly that. Last season, they were the heavy favorites coming in for the #1 pick. This season, they started off 1-6, but everyone kept competing. I mean, think about that for a second. They started 1-6 and won 9 games. Coming off of a season where they had the second pick in the draft, they won 3 games. The Lions from weeks 9 through 18 had a top 5 offense, a top 17 defense, not to mention they own the 6th pick in the draft via the Rams. They also got the better quarterback in that trade. Jared Goff was top 5 in terms of QBR. He also led an offense that ranked 3rd in EPA per dropback. Only the Chiefs and Bills were ahead. This offensive line is completely loaded. It's young, it's scrappy, it's physical. That's why we see the Lions go for it more than just about anyone on 4th down. Because if they find themselves in a 4-2, a 4-1, a 4 inches, they feel great about their odds. Dan Campbell, Aaron Glenn, Ben Johnson. Hell, their special teams coach might be the best in the league. If I'm saying this correctly, Dave Phipp. I mean, the Lions, they had the best special teams unit in the NFL. Their grade was a 90.7. That's number 1, which beats the Commanders and Titans for the top spot. Jack Fox owns NFL records for the highest net in gross averages over a punter's first 25, 50, 75, 100, 125, and 150 attempts. If you don't believe me, go watch the Packers game. Without Jack Fox, they might not win that. The field position that he was putting his team at was fantastic. Inside the 20, inside the 10. Things like that don't get talked about enough. The Lions, they're honestly just as deep as the Bengals. And I would say the Lions are definitely, they've been rebuilding for a while, but legitimately last season was the rebuild where, in my opinion, it started, because that was Brad Holmes' first draft. And he found 3 level star players in that draft. The first one is Penei Sewell, clearly the future tackle of this team. In the 3rd round, pick 72, they drafted Aleem McNeil out of North Carolina State. Now, the game that really stood out to me for McNeil was the one against the Giants. Saquon Barkley, I've never seen him run for negative that many times, and a lot of that was because of Aleem McNeil. Not to mention, in the 4th round of that draft, they got Amon-Ra St. Brown, who had an unbelievable rookie season, especially the last 6 or 7 games, and in this season, Brown continued. But this draft, the 2nd draft for Brad Holmes, to me is what ultimately stands out. Aiden Hutchinson is the best player in this draft. Now, they have the 2nd pick, give or take. I know a lot of people will take Sauce, but Aiden had more interceptions. He just dominates the game more. I mean, Aiden Hutchinson, you pair him with James Houston, who we'll get into in a second here, that is just a deadly duo. And oh yeah, the Lions have the 6th pick, so they're probably going to draft someone even, not necessarily better than them, but they're going to draft another talented player, or in between them. So you also have Josh Pascal, who was a 2nd round pick. We haven't seen much of him just due to injuries, but he has a lot of potential. He's definitely a future piece of this team. They drafted Kirby Joseph, who picked off Aaron Rodgers 3 times. He was the third round pick and 97th overall. James Mitchell was in the 5th round. Now, they traded T.J. Hawkinson, obviously, to get that pick swap with the Vikings, but a large reason why they did that was because they're comfortable with their tight ends. They have guys like Brock Wright and also James Mitchell. There's just a lot more depth on this Lions team than the Bengals have. And the Bengals, obviously, they've made the Super Bowl, they've made the AFC Championship. They've also had a couple of years to turn this around. And not to mention, they have probably the 2nd best quarterback in the league in Joe Burrow, where the Lions have, Jared Goff's good, but he's not a franchise caliber player. But I'm really liking these teams that are just building and building and building around their quarterbacks. The Eagles is a prime example. They went out there and they brought in A.J. Brown. They brought in Hassan Reddick, right? They brought in James Bradbury. The Lions, they need to keep building around Jared Goff because like I said, he was 5th in QBR. Goff is a good quarterback. He's not the type of guy to where you legitimately can build around him in the sense of if you're starting a franchise off, Jared Goff wouldn't be one of the first picks or anything, but if you have a good talented team around him, a good line, an elite offensive play caller in Ben Johnson, who probably should be a head coach, but he decided to come back to Detroit, which makes sense because they have a special thing going, man. Johnson clearly realized that. So Also in the draft, we talked about, Malcolm Rodriguez and James Houston. Rodriguez is a fast, athletic linebacker. He's very talented. They definitely need someone next to him, though. But James Houston was definitely the biggest steal of this draft. I mean, the first game of his career, he had double-digit sacks. Or double-digit. He had 2 sacks, right? I mean, Myles Garrett and was it Nick Bosa at the top of my head, the only 2 players to ever do that? I have that somewhere in my notes if you can give me a second on that. Let me scroll all the way down. A lot of pages. Okay, so yeah, that Thanksgiving Day game against the Bills, TJ Watt. It was TJ Watt. So since 2017, so he became the first player with 2 sacks in his NFL debut, joining Myles Garrett and TJ Watt. He was also the first player in Lions history to produce a multi-sack performance in his first career game. The Lions obviously lost that game, but the fact that they were competing with a red-hot Buffalo Bills team, that was the start of this. In Houston, he finished the season with 8 sacks in just 7 games, which tied him for the third most by a Lions rookie. He missed more than half the season, remember. Aiden Hutchinson had 9.5 sacks, and they became the first rookie duo in league history to have 8 or more sacks apiece in a single season for the same team since the stat became official in 1982. Now, I don't have this in my notes, but I remember reading a while ago that wasn't Houston like not even on the 53-man roster. Like he's such a good player, and something that doesn't get talked about is that first game he made was his mother's birthday. So that's where it all started. He just went out there and competed for his mom and had 2 sacks. He's very talented. The thing for the Lions, they definitely need to get this guy in just passing, obvious pass situations, which is why I'm all for drafting another edge. I know it doesn't make too much sense. They definitely should go defensive tackle, but if the best player on the board is an edge, well, then they can just use Houston on obvious passing downs, which will make him even more valuable, right? So, but this Lions team, there's just so much to talk about. I mean, their special teams unit, I touched upon it a little bit. It's not just their punter, Jack Fox. I mean, Khalif Raymond, he was second team All-Pro as a returner. He had 13.2 yards on average on punt returns. That's the second highest in the NFL. He had over 600 receiving yards and over 250 punt return yards. I mean, nobody else did that for sure. Yeah, he was the only player to do that. Even if I didn't have that, I would have told you he's the only player to do that. That's just ridiculous. Malcolm Rodriguez, he's very good on defense, but on special teams, he had a 91 grade from Pro Football Focus, which was the highest amongst the rookie class. Now, he only played in 68 snaps, but again, what he did this season as a 6th-round pick is extremely impressive. CJ Moore, he's another guy on this Lions special teams who I remember he had that, what was it? It was a 4th and 8, right? And it was a fake punt. The Lions were at their own 26-yard line, and he ended up picking it up. So you can see the play calls. I mean, I guess that would be on Dan Campbell would decide to go for that, and then who would run that up? Would it be Johnson or would it be their special teams coach? But whoever decided to come up with that play was definitely brilliant. The Lions just are a very aggressive team. They play to win. And I know that sounds kind of obvious, but this team, they always are thinking about winning the game. I feel like a lot of teams are conservative nowadays, but like the Lions, remember they had that 4th and 1 against the Packers, and then Goff was able to hit DJ Chark? That was the type of play to me that just shows that the Lions are coming, bro. And it's pretty stupid how they didn't make the playoffs. Like, I know that the Seahawks had the tiebreaker, but the Lions, I mean, they legitimately could have went from the 2 seed to a playoff team. And that's not even the craziest thing. The craziest thing is that they started 1-6. They were literally 32nd in defense. And from weeks 9 to 18, like I said, they were 17th in defense. They were 5th in offense. So when you guys are talking about the defense, yeah, the defense definitely needs improvement. Like, there's holes in the defense for sure, but they were a top 17 defense in the second half of the season. And they have a very, very promising defensive coordinator in Aaron Glenn. I mean, last season when the Lions did win 3 games, the defense was keeping them in a lot of those games, and there wasn't much talent on it to begin with. They didn't have any of the guys that they have now. Like, they didn't have Aiden, they didn't have Kirby Joseph, they didn't have James Houston or Malcolm Rodriguez, so they were doing it without all of those players, and that's something that just doesn't get talked about. There was a lot of blowout losses, which sort of blew the statistics out of proportion, but yeah, honestly, I mean, the Lions, they traded Matthew Stafford. You guys can see him on the thumbnail. I should have mentioned him earlier because he is on the thumbnail, but they got a couple of picks from that. They got Jared Goff, and the offense last season, not 2022, but in 2021, it averaged only 19.1 points per game, which ranked 25th in the NFL. But there was just so much potential. Like DeAndre Swift was the best player on this offense. Or actually, well, Amon-Ra St. Brown, you could argue, but I would say Swift was the best player. I mean, he had a couple of like 120 plus back-to-back, rushing yard games. He just couldn't stay healthy is the thing. Like if Swift could stay on the field consistently, we'd be talking about an all-pro type of player. But Penei Sewell, Taylor Decker, those were the Amon-Ra St. Brown. Like those were the guys who legitimately were balling out on the offense. St. Brown averaged 8.6 receptions on 11.4 targets for 90.2 receiving yards and 0.8 receiving touchdowns per game. He also had 49 rushing yards on 6 attempts and a touchdown. I mean, over a 17-game pace, that would account for 146 receptions, 1,533 receiving yards, and 14 touchdowns. Those are all top 4 in the NFL. So you guys can see the Lions found someone in the 4th round. They found a legit superstar type of receiver. And it's unfortunate that, well, actually, it's really not. I was going to say Anthony Lynn. He got obviously let go of his offensive play calling duties. That would prove to be a very good decision. Yeah, obviously we're getting closer to the end here, but the Lions defense that season, it gave up 27.5 points per game, which was the 2nd most in the league. Jeff Okudah, though, towards Achilles in week 1. The secondary wasn't coming away with interceptions, and guys were missing tackles. I mean, the Lions had 11 players who finished with a missed tackle rate of 15% or higher. There clearly wasn't a pass rush. I mean, the only guy that was consistently getting home was Charles Harris, who had 7.5 sacks. And don't forget, Harris was brought in as a free agent by Holmes. So was Jerry Jacobs, who is a pretty solid player in their secondary. The Lions, I mean, they had the 12th ranked percentage in terms of lowest sack rate in 2021, so 5.72% of plays ending in a sack. They were about middle in the pack in pressures allowed and tackles for a loss allowed. They also had a ton of penalties. I mean, the offensive line accounted for the 3rd most flags in the league with 39. Now, this season, Penei Sewell led the team in penalties. He had 8. Technically, he had 9, but one of them was declined. So you guys can see there's still room for improvement there. But overall, the Lions, they were called for 90 total penalties in 2022. That is 15 less than the 105 they saw in 2021. So the Lions are clearly improving all across the board. I mean, their special teams last season was elite, but this season it was the best. Their defense, now obviously they didn't finish 17th in defense, but that's really all I care about is what they did in the second half. That's all that matters, not the first half. Really, like the Lions starting 1-6, I guess it matters, but it really doesn't. Like you don't really see people talking about that anymore. They're talking about the 9 wins and how this team is going to be competing for the division and a Super Bowl next season. But they were 32nd in defense, 17th in defense this season if you want to go off the second half. Offensively, they were pretty mid. I forget what I said. Did I say 19th? No, they were 25th. Jesus. Oh, they had 19 points per game and they were 25th in the NFL. So they went from 25th to 5th in offense. This is a team that has those 2 first-round picks, and I'm all for going defense on both of them. I mean, obviously the Lions don't need anything offensively. The only offensive so Anthony Richardson, I love him, but I get Lions fans' perspective. You're in the middle of a really good thing going. You don't want to take a developmental quarterback. So yeah, definitely. But I was gonna say the only first-round offensive-minded player I would be okay with would be Bijan Robinson at 18. I think that wouldn't be terrible just because the Lions' offensive line is elite in terms of run blocking. They were top 9 in the league, and Bijan Robinson clearly is the best offensive player in this draft. And well, it's a running back at the end of the day, but I don't think we've seen a more complete running back prospect than Robinson. I mean, Breece Hall and Kenneth Walker were great, but they have just nothing on Bijan Robinson. If the Lions brought in this guy, like let's say they go defensive tackle, right, or they go edge rusher, hell, maybe they go corner. Maybe they go corner. If they feel that there's a can't miss corner prospect, then you take him. And then 18, they go with Bijan. Well, now they have Jeff Okudah and potentially another stud corner on each side of each other. They also have several more picks too. Like they have their 2nd round pick. They're going to have the one from the Vikings. So they can hit defense there. I might make a separate video on this because Bijan Robinson doesn't deserve to be at the end of a 14-minute video. He should have his own video. He's that talented. But, I mean, with DeAndre Swift and Jamal Williams definitely coming back because he means everything for the culture and he had an incredible season. I mean, I know he doesn't present much explosiveness, but I mean, he led the league in touchdowns. Like he's just a great teammate, and he's amazing down in the red zone or in short yardage situations. He's not an explosive runner in the sense where he's gonna turn a 5-yard run into a big time. Like, he's not gonna do that, but that's why they have DeAndre Swift. But yeah, outside of that, that's pretty much the video. I mean, I think I touched everything. Let me just quickly go through. Yeah, I touched everything that I wanted to. Just credit to these coaches, Aaron Glenn, Ben Johnson, Dan Campbell. They have a great, and also their, I mentioned earlier, but their special teams coach, Dave Phipp. I mean, they had the #1 special team. Like, why aren't we talking about that more, man? But yeah, it's your boy Swaggy. You can also find me at my brand new channel. I think I called it Lions Nation. Yeah, I'm definitely going to keep making Lions videos. I mean, even during the playoffs, I've been making Lions videos, but off-season is going to go crazy. My next Lions video will either be me on Madden or it's going to be Bijan as of right now. But appreciate you guys for the love, man. Have a good one. I'm out.